The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe.
Greater Salem, New Hampshire Chamber of Commerce presents Success in the 603, a podcast focusing on Granite Staters who have had success in the public or private sector. We'll hear stories of how these people came to be, where they are, and what you can do to get there too. Sit back and enjoy. You are in wicked awesome company.
Welcome back, everyone, to Success in the 603, a podcast and vodcast that celebrates the best people in New Hampshire and hears about their stories of success and how hopefully you can learn from those people and apply it to your life and make the world and the 603 a better place. I'm Donna Morris for the Greater Salem Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, I'm Craig Dufton. I'm a business owner and what am I, a chamber member? Chamber member, Rotarian, along with our guest here, Jim Smith. Happy New Year to you both. It's going to be a cool 2019 if I can get rid of my cold.
Yeah. And for the people out there listening, we did give Craig a really hard time right before we hit the record button. Yeah. So this should be really interesting.
It all started because somebody's going on a cruise.
And it's not me.
And it's not me. So
anyway. So why don't you introduce our guest, Craig?
I would absolutely love to introduce our guest. His name is Jim Smith. He's a Rotarian as well, a Salemite. How long have you been in Salem, Jim?
2007. So
okay.
Coming up on 12 years.
Nice. We're happy to have you here. The great part about it is that Jim has had many different, well, some people have one or two careers. Jim has had many careers over his lifetime, and he's going to share his experiences with us. He is a retired Brigadier General from the Air Force, graduate of the Air Force Academy, and also he was the former ambassador to the Saudi Arabians from 2009 to 2013 under President Obama. So, Jim, it is like an amazing pleasure to have you here, and thank you for being here.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
All right, Donna. You ready to hear some stuff about Jim Smith?
I am, actually. I met Jim just a couple of years ago, and I'm going to learn a lot more from you today, but I just want to start with, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I mean, I know that you went to the Air Force Academy, but where are you from before you got to Salem and those things? Tell us about yourself, Jim.
Well, Donna, I grew up on a dairy farm in the middle of Georgia. 2 miles out on a dirt road to get to our farm. There were 6 kids in our family. And if you know anything about dairy farming, you know you go only so far as to be back for the 4:30 milking. So I'd never been west of Phoenix City, Alabama, which is right across the river from Columbus, Georgia. I knew that there was a big world out there that I wanted to see. My mother accused me of having wanderlust. She called it.
Accused, or do you actually might think that you actually had wanderlust?
She was right.
Correctly accused you.
And when I think about seminal events as a kid, going in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, in the summer we were sitting there watching the lunar landing, and Neil Armstrong stepping down onto the moon, and I said, there is a big world there and I want to see it, and that was the beginning of thinking about aviation, and I applied for the Air Force Academy. That in itself is a long story. I knew nothing about the Air Force Academy. My twin brother and I were looking for scholarships, and while I was playing football, I would not have been able to play at a Division I school. And we saw this movie called Francis Goes to West Point. The Donald O'Connor movie about a talking mule, black and white, and at the end of the movie they're dressed in uniforms and all the girls at the ball, and I said, well, let me go look at that. And so I went to the guidance counselor on Monday and said, I saw this movie about West Point. Do you have a catalog? He said, well, yeah, I have a catalog, but you can't get in. And I said, why is that? He said, well, you're from a small school. They want kids from big city schools that have had calculus and algebra and all that. I said, give me the catalog. Mm-hmm. So I took it home, and after milking the cows, I read every word of it. I said, I can do that. So I went back in and said, I want to apply. He says, well, have you thought about Annapolis? And I said, what's that? He said, well, it's the Naval Academy. I mean, I was dumber than a bucket full of rocks. I knew nothing about the outside world. And he gave me the Annapolis catalog, and he said, what about the Air Force? And I said, they got one too? And he go, yeah, he gave it to me. Okay. And so I went through all three of them, and they're about the same, except one's more about air, one's more about dirt, one's more about water. And I was very fortunate to get accepted. Nominated by my congressman, who knew everybody in the district, and it gave me opportunities that I never dreamed of. And I feel very, very fortunate to have been given that opportunity. And I actually sit on the board for Senator Hassan's selection committee for the Air Force Academy, and I see young people that were just like me, that work really, really hard, doing well in school, and one young person who was a farmer, and I see kids that are achieving at the same level, and it just makes you feel proud that we still have those young, like your son.
Well, yeah, thank you. So, full disclosure, my son did end up at the Air Force Academy. He's in his second year there now, and so I kind of know this, but I wonder if you'd share with other people. That must have been quite the culture shock from someone who hadn't gone more than, a couple, maybe 100 miles tops away from home to, hey, you're going to be transplanted in the middle of the mountains, and they're going to break you down and build you up, and you're going to be jumping out of planes and all that. Can you talk about how did you, talks about your character.
I want to know, when did you decide that you wanted to stop milking cows and fly airplanes instead?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that transition.
Well, if you've spent your formative years milking cows, it doesn't take you long to come to the conclusion that there are other things in life.
I asked for that one right there.
That wasn't hard. I knew nothing about the culture getting there. I had never visited the place, had never been, again, west of Phoenix City, Alabama. It was a culture shock, but it was very much like there was an old movie, No Time for Sergeants, about this country hick that ends up in the air in basic training. I was very much like that, and I'd see things that would happen, and I'd just stop and laugh, and upperclassmen would come and explain to me in their own unique way that it's not appropriate to stop and laugh.
And that would be yelling in your face.
Yeah. I remember driving up. I mean, I'd never been on an airplane before when I flew out there. My mother made me a sack lunch because we didn't know that you actually serve meals on airplanes. She gave me $20, so I had a $20 bill in my pocket because I was told that I had to get a taxi from the airport to the academy. I'd never been in a taxi, so I didn't know what it cost. As it turned out, there was an Air Force Academy bus there, and we all piled on. And we drove out, and of course the academy's at the base of the mountains, and I was standing there with my mouth open because I'd never seen anything so beautiful in my life when we pulled up. So we get off the bus, and I'm just looking at it with my mouth open. These upperclassmen come piling down, yelling and screaming, and I looked at one of them, I said, I can hear you. You don't have to scream.
Oh, my. That must have gone over really well.
So the first day was not a good day. As it turns out, the pace of things and the amount of work you have to do between the physical demands, because I had grown up working and was an athlete, none of that really bothered me very much. So when other cadets would be down and homesick and that never happened to me. I never considered doing anything else. I knew that this was where
How were your parents about all this, your mom and dad at the time?
Well, supportive. As it turns out, my father had health problems and passed away from a heart attack while I was in basic training. So I lost my dad at 18. But because my older brother had gone off to college the year before, my twin and I were going to college, we had to sell the herd off in May before I left in June. So the milking farm was now a thing of the past. But my dad was in World War II, the Merchant Marine first in the Navy, and then was drafted into the Army. He was on a troop ship headed for Tokyo when the atom bomb dropped, and spent a year in Japan during the occupation. And he would tell people that his claim to fame in World War II was that he helped set up the first baseball diamond in Tokyo. So he felt like he had his
little bit of America
positive impact. My namesake, my Uncle Jimmy, one of my real heroes in life, passed away at 90, but he landed in Omaha Beach on the 9th of June as one of the first infantry replacements. And I took my wife Janet back to Omaha Beach several years ago and traced his steps from Omaha Beach to San Lo and to the Hurtgen Forest. He spent the winter in the Hurtgen Forest and then crossed the Rhine River at Remagen. So our family, going back generations, had been involved in military. In fact, my older brother had done family history where somebody in my family had been in every conflict going back to the Revolution, but the highest rank anybody had ever achieved was sergeant. Really? Ours was a family of farmers. When called, we come do their duty and come home, put a uniform in the closet, and go back to farming. So as a career military, I was an aberration, but they were very supportive.
And where did your twin brother end up going to school?
He went to VMI.
Oh, cool.
And he had an Army ROTC scholarship to VMI, and then spent 4 years in the Army, and then spent a 25-year career as a plant manager for Procter & Gamble, doing plants in Europe and Asia, Canada, and Latin America.
It's a long way from the farm you boys were exploring. So we're going to do a quick commercial. So I want to just thank our sponsors, because Success in the 603 is made possible. We keep it coming to you because of our sponsors, and we thank them for their support. We'd like to thank Pika's Pub and Grill. They are located at 10 Ayers Village Road in Methuen, Mass. They have been in business. Well, the great-grandfather was 80 years ago, and they have passed it down a couple generations. So Wayne and Shane are over there cranking out some great food, great atmosphere, and thank you very much for their support. Be sure and check them out. You go there quite a bit, right?
I was there yesterday. Yep.
So there you go.
Not going to lie.
We both recommend Pika's. That's great. So
yeah, they have a new loyalty program, too.
Oh.
So you go in, you sign up, loyalty, every $100 you spend, you get $10 back.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's a great
definitely
deal.
check
Great
them
deal.
out. And where, let me see if I have, I don't have their phone number, sorry. Darn it. But Pika's.
Yeah, Pikas.com.
So you've done your studies, and then I guess we're going to try and get into how in the world you go from, second lieutenant to
Brigadier General.
Yeah. Please.
Well, it was 1974 he graduated from the academy, correct?
I graduated in 1974, was among a small group that was accepted into graduate school. So I went to graduate school at Indiana University. My undergraduate degree is in military history, and went to Indiana and finished my master's degree in about 8 months at Indiana, and did my master's thesis on the interrelationship of communism and nationalism in France from 1939 1941, mostly primary French sources. And then went to pilot training at Moody Air Force Base, Georgia. Finished at Del Rio, Texas. Del Rio, Texas is not the end of the world, but you can see it from your front porch. And then was selected to stay there as a T-38 instructor, which ironically, as it turned out later in my career, I trained classes of mixed Saudi and Iranian students in the same class. And so did that in 1979. And then went to F-15 training.
So by then you're a captain?
Yes.
79.
Spent 2 years as a lieutenant, 2 years as a second lieutenant, 2 years as a first lieutenant. So at the 4-year point, you become a captain. And I transitioned to the F-15 and spent the next 22 years in the F-15 between operational assignments and staff assignments. The first assignment was in the Netherlands, a staff assignment at Ramstein, Germany. I went to Intermediate Service School, Air Command and Staff College in 1984. Then flew at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. That's where I was a squadron commander. Actually, a squadron commander of the 94th Fighter Squadron, which was Eddie Rickenbacker's.
Which you went to Desert Storm with? Is that true?
No, I gave up that squadron just after we deployed the other two squadrons. I went over to Desert Storm as non-attached at that point. I was an assistant director of operations, and then went to National War College. Stayed at the National War College as a professor, Air Force chair, professor, military strategy and operations. And from there, I went to Tyndall Air Force Base, where I ran all of the training and maintenance for the F-15.
What year?
94 to 96.
That's where I was born. Tyndall Air Force Base.
Yeah. Redneck Riviera. And from there, went out to Colorado Springs, where I was in Cheyenne Mountain as a command director and deputy for operations for the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD. Was not a flying assignment. And from then, went to Kadena Air Force, Okinawa, Japan, which is the largest combat wing in the Air Force, and was a magnificent assignment that Janet and I loved. And then my final assignment was back at Norfolk, Virginia, at the
War College there too?
Not the War College. It was Joint Forces Command,
okay,
where we were doing all of the 3- and 4-star staff training for all the commands around the world, and I was also running an experiment called Millennium Challenge, which was the largest defense experiment in our history. It was really moving. How do you leverage information revolution to fundamentally change how you plan and execute military operations? And so that was for military.
And that was was that all because of the millennial change on the clocks and all that stuff? You were concerned about that stuff, or
that was Y2K?
Yeah,
that was back in when I was at Colorado Springs at NORAD Space Command, and one of my ancillary duties was to run the group that puts technology into Cheyenne Mountain. So the Y2K issue was centerpiece of what we were trying to solve then. The Millennium Challenge is an issue that, if you look at the theater design of the campaign plan for Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, and the first Gulf War, they were identical. There was a deployment, a build-up, an air campaign, a maritime campaign, a breakout, establish a lodgement, and then break out from there. But the technology had changed dramatically over that time.
Sure.
But our ability to plan hasn't changed because we did everything in parallel or in sequential. So the idea is, how do you leverage information revolution to pull all the people you need to plan together at one time, not physically but virtually? Because before, we could execute faster than we could plan. But because of all of that work, we can now plan faster than we can execute. In fact, you can take a SEAL team and put them on an airplane with their highly secured devices and plan the operation en route.
Wow, that's amazing.
And you could never imagine doing that before.
Wow.
Just to wait to hear and figure out.
And so this was when you were during 9/11. You were there.
Yes, I was there during 9/11.
And that's where I really, like, my eyes widened when we met after that. We met in Rotary, and you're such a wonderful person. You've always been like an amazing individual. And when you meet a certain person, there's something about it, and then you dig deeper, and there's layers upon layers. And Jim's got lots of layers. He's got lots of bio stuff we could talk about. But I think the speech that you gave at our 9/11 breakfast was great, because it was a really different perspective on not such a great day, obviously not a great day in our history, but you learned a lot. And you want to talk about that really quick?
I didn't hear it, so I'd love to know the highlights of that. That must have been...
Well, first of all, let's put the day in context. I mean, I really admire Salem and Windham, the fire departments that get together every year.
It's amazing, yes.
And And it's not just recognizing those that fell on 9/11, but the commitment of our first responders and what they do on a daily basis
Absolutely.
for us. And we have such a wonderful group here. Chief Betts and the whole group here in Salem really stand watch for us 24/7. But what I was asked to do is just talk a little bit about where you were that day. And everybody knows where they were that day and have a different perspective. But because I'd spent a career in the military and now I was at a command that had connections with the Guard, the Reserve, the FBI, law enforcement, and all of our domestic entities, even though it didn't have operational control, we were stuck with what do we do? And at first, the conclusion was, well, this is domestic. We are not involved. And my boss, I was a 1-star, my boss was a 2-star. I went over to the meeting and came back and he said, well, we don't think we'll have a role in it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but we took an oath of office that says we're going to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I don't think we're going to be able to walk away from that responsibility. And he kind of stared at me, the phone rang, and they'd recalled another battle staff. Oh, yes, we are going to be involved. Now, the first question was, what do we do with all those airplanes that are airborne? And there was no concept of operations revolving around shooting down a commercial airplane. Everything we had trained for and all of our operations were based around intercepting an airplane and escorting it because it was a hijack scenario. So that was the only thought process that you ever had. Right. So there was no way to communicate to a pilot, and we didn't have a process, so we grounded all the airplanes. Then somebody said, well, we'll just launch all of our alert airplanes. Well, you had 2 at Cape Cod on alert, you had 2 in Washington, D.C., F-16s on alert, and you had 2 in Florida. So you can launch 6.
In Key West, Florida, not like in Orlando, Florida. It was like even further. So
our infrastructure was oriented toward an outside threat coming in, not an inside threat. So there was an awful lot of debate about what should we do and what should the military's role be in support of civilian law enforcement and whatnot. So that was what we talked about that day.
Yeah, it was a great story. I mean, I encourage anybody to come to those breakfasts. I mean, it's going to be free. It's going to be on us. Please, this September, just take 15, 20 minutes out of your day to come enjoy some of these great stories. Do you want to do another commercial? And then we'll talk about Jim's ambassador life?
Actually, you know what? I'd like to do a quick shout out to the Chamber of Commerce, because they made this possible, and I love the support of my board. They've been very supportive about us launching this as a chamber initiative and highlighting our area and the people in that area and throughout the state. That's where we're growing. So many thanks to the Greater Salem Chamber of Commerce, which I have the privilege of serving as the president. Chamber is a nonprofit group of businesses that we provide business advocacy, information, networking opportunities, visibility opportunities, and community involvement. And actually, in the next couple weeks, we just proofed our annual directory, which will be mailed to 28,000 homes. So the residents of Salem, Wyndham, Atkinson, Pelham, and Hampstead should be getting a nice business directory from the Greater Salem Chamber of Commerce.
I love mine.
Excellent.
I'm an ambassador for them, so I love the chamber.
Craig
Been
does
a long-time
everything.
member. Yep. I'm an ambassador in my own way. Not quite like the ambassador Jim Smith here.
Speaking of ambassadors,
yes.
why don't we just
after you're in Virginia for 9/11, you get out. You retire from the Air Force in 2002.
Yes.
And I think you went to. Do you go to work for Raytheon after that, or was it?
I went to work for Lockheed for about 6 months, and then I was offered a position at Raytheon in Tucson. So we lived in Tucson for 2 years, and then Raytheon offered me a job running an aircraft factory in Wichita, Kansas. So
Cool.
the T6 factory, which is the airplane that you fly in pilot training now, I was building that airplane. Which for a guy that flew airplanes for 30 years, having a job running the factory that builds them, and then to be able to fly it after it comes off the line, it was heaven.
Yeah,
But then Raytheon up and sold it. And so I was given about a week to decide what to do, and we decided to come back to Raytheon here and work for Raytheon and over at Tewksbury. So one of our best friends, Janet's best friend in life, lived in Portsmouth. So we started looking up here, and she found a wonderful home on Millville Lake over there. And so we moved here in 2007. And I tell people that I've moved 23 times, but I've moved the last time.
Nice. That's great. So 2007, you're still at Raytheon then?
Yes.
And you're at local Raytheon though now. You're in Andover.
Right.
Okay. And in 2009, you get a call. Or how did you get involved? I want to know how someone goes from working at Raytheon, living here in Salem, New Hampshire. I mean, I understand why they picked you. I mean, you had great experience with the Saudis throughout your whole career as a general, and
well, people ask me how I became an ambassador. I say I answered the telephone.
it was that simple. I had it, Donna.
How did someone call you to ask you to be an ambassador?
Let's go back to 2007 when we moved here. I was really disgruntled with the U.S. foreign policy at the time. In the Bush administration of unilateralism, interventionism. It just didn't seem the American way. And my wife Janet picked up Barack Obama's first book, and she said, read that. And I read it, and his worldview seemed identical to mine.
Cool.
So I met Barack Obama on a hay bale up at Max Apples in Londonderry.
All of the 603, he was coming through.
And had a talk with him then. So a friend of mine and I were the first two retired flag officers to support him publicly. And I worked, I did a lot of surrogate speaking for him during the campaign. Went with him on a bunch of different venues, served on his National Security Advisory team. And then after he was elected, I served on the DOD transition team, and then went back to Raytheon I was doing this on the weekends. And I wasn't looking for a job. I had a good job. And I assumed that if they wanted me to do something in the administration, it would be in the Defense Department. And again, I wasn't thinking that much about it. And then the phone rang in late April 2009, and they said, we need you to come in and see the secretary. A frantic phone call about 7 o'clock in the morning. And I said, well, I saw Secretary Gates last month. What's the issue? It was a different secretary. And I said, well, which one? Well, Secretary Clinton. Yeah. Well, what's the subject? Well, I can't tell you. So Dennis McDonough, who later became the chief of staff, he and I worked together a lot on the campaign. I called him at the White House. I said, Dennis, I got this phone call. What? He goes, I'm sorry. He actually used some colorful metaphors and apologizing to me. But then now President Obama came on the phone. And he said, look, Jim, I'm going to Cairo to give this speech, and I've got to go to Riyadh first. I need somebody in Riyadh that I know and I trust. Will you go do it? I said, of course I will. That's how it happened.
Wow.
And we were there for over 4 years, in our 5th year when we left.
How much time had you spent in Saudi before that?
Well, I flew out of Dhahran during the Gulf War.
Yep.
And I had served with Saudi officers at the National War College. I trained many of them to fly in 76 to 79. And at Raytheon, we had done a lot of work in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. So I was very familiar with the country. I was an untrained diplomat. But I think at the end of the day, the Saudis appreciated directness a lot more than they did.
Well, you made an interesting comment to me. You know, you weren't really beholden to anybody at the time, and you weren't a career diplomat. You know, you were a career military guy, right? You're a career general, and you don't think an ambassador. You weren't really thinking as an ambassador would think when you took that job, right? You're thinking of, how would you train it militarily? And
well, it actually the military thinking is a very small part of it. But as an ambassador, you are the president's representative. And in fact, beside the president, you are the senior U.S. government person for that country. and you're there to represent the administration and the American people, our interests and values. That's your job.
Yep.
Yes, a lot of high-level meetings, and we had very close connection with the senior leadership of the country. But then Janet and I traveled all 14 provinces. We saw that our job was to get out and represent what is America. And so we did that and traveled throughout the country. We met people who are friends for a lifetime. The Saudis are among the most warm, hospitable, generous people on the face of the earth. Again, met friends for a lifetime.
Did you have a lot of people that you remembered from before? Were they still involved in the government from like someone similar in your situation that was like a pilot?
Yes. A good friend who had retired from the military was the squadron commander of the squadron that hosted us when we were flying during the Gulf War. So yeah, we had those kinds of, and periodically you run into somebody and I know you, and you go, yeah, well, we were here. So, but again, my wife had taught at the National War College for 17 years, and the Saudis knew her as a professor, not an ambassador's wife. Mm-hmm. So it was a different welcome for her. And very professional.
Excellent.
I feel like we need to comment a little bit, like how have you, Saudi Arabia's in the newspaper these days, and do you have anything to comment on the change that you've seen, or like has there been a change in power that you've seen, a change in policies and?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of media events, and I will tell you that I've been very, very critical. Mm-hmm. It's not the same Saudi Arabia that I left. Saudi Arabia traditionally has been a consensus-based culture, inordinately slow in moving on anything, but because it is consensus. Yeah. The power structure of the country is one prince would run the army, another prince the navy, another the National Guard, and it was all split, so no one person could ever hold the reins of all of the defense establishment, and no one person had decision authority under the king. King Abdullah was one of the warmest and most positive people I'd ever met. The Saudis never wanted to be on the front page of anything. There was never an out-of-country operation since 1934.
Really?
They stayed at home. So what's going on now runs totally counter to the culture and society that I knew. Now, I know what's happening is Mohammed bin Salman is trying to move the base of support from the ultra-conservative Salafists, we call them Wahhabis, to the youth of the country. So that's why you see this modernization of the society and women driving concerts and whatnot. And the youth of the country are really behind him. The problem is this other piece, when you consolidate power, there are very few people like Sultan Qaboos of Oman that use that in a positive way. You almost always see it used in a negative way of a Mubarak or al-Sisi or Erdogan. And that's what MBS is doing. And his strategy is a good one. The tactics that he's using is undermining that strategy because the foreign investment is drying up, which he needs for the success in the Saudi Vision 2030. Last year, the foreign investment was $7.5 billion. This year, even before the murder, was $1.5 billion.
Oh, really? It had dropped prior to that.
Oh, yeah. $80 billion of Saudi money has flowed out of the country because they're not comfortable. So the resources to accomplish what he needs are not going to be there. So while the youth of the country are happy today, they're going to wake up one day and realize that those jobs that they're promised aren't going to be there. And so the issue is not so much, and by the way, I knew Jamal Khashoggi very, very well. It broke my heart when I heard that. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Where had you met him?
I met him in Saudi half a dozen times. I invited him to the embassy one time because I had all the reporting officers from the embassy and the consulates, and he spent 2 hours talking to them. If you really want to understand my country, you need to look here, and you need to look here, you need to look here.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, and he was wonderful, warm, and was not an anarchist, and was not a Muslim Brotherhood member and things like that he's being accused of. He was just murdered. And he was murdered for telling the truth.
Wow.
All right, we gotta get. God, that was so amazing.
You gotta
Jim.
ask. You're talking
insight,
Saudi Arabia. You have
but
to
your
ask.
insight is so amazing because I was reading and doing my research, as you know, and you've got. It's a difficult such a difficult situation. I mean, I don't understand how we don't even have anybody as an ambassador there right now too.
Well, you've got an administration that really doesn't feel like it needs that infrastructure. So we have a transactional president, so therefore we have a transactional relationship with the Saudis, which is essentially Jared to MBS.
Right.
And when that happens, that infrastructure of representing American values, American interests, to anybody other than that conversation doesn't happen anymore. And it's not serving us well not to have an ambassador, and it's not just Saudi Arabia. I mean,
no, sure.
40% of the embassies today don't have ambassadors because they haven't been nominated.
All right, well, let's turn it over to a positive note here with your quote. You got a quote for us that you want to share with the...
Well, there's a lot of them. I'm going to give you one that goes back 50 years to my days as a cadet, that I think back to it every time that I have to make a hard decision. And it's a quote from Napoleon where he said, "L'audace, l'audace, toujours l'audace." Boldness, boldness, always boldness.
And you've used that quite a bit, I can tell, in your career. You've had a very bold career. It's been a very amazing career.
Yeah.
That was our Santo Insurance.
Yeah. So another sponsor, Santo Insurance, brings us the quote of the week. They're located at 224 Main Street in Salem, New Hampshire. Jamie Santo and his crew take care of their people. They shop around for the best coverage through a variety of different providers, and be sure to give them a call or check them out at santoinsurance.com.
Well, Jim, I've loved having you here. I could talk to you for another hour and a half, but unfortunately, our show has to wrap up in a couple of minutes here.
There's some, there's a couple. My head is spinning. Just everything. I feel like what I got out of you is that. What would you tell the people out there, and that with that boldness quote, I kind of feel that you're telling people, you're talking about a farm boy who hadn't gone anywhere, and it takes a amount of boldness to put yourself out there to end up
to tell the person that told him he can't go to West Point that
Yeah, I love that too. Right? Oh, really? I can't go.
don't take no for an answer. And the other thing I say is get involved. I've been blessed with multiple magnificent careers, and most of them have been in service, in national service. I came here, and Jen and I fell in love with Salem. We absolutely love it here, and with the Rotary Club and other things we do, we've come to realize that there's this other legion of people that are involved in community service that's just as noble. And I would tell people, get involved. There are many people that need help. But you get this great sense of satisfaction of being involved in a community. I didn't get to do that. When you move every 2 years, you don't get to do that. So we feel just honored to be a citizen of this little town.
Well, we're honored to have you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I personally am. I'm glad that we've met, and as Donna will tell you, you've been
wicked awesome company.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you so much. Ambassador Jim Smith, Brigadier General Jim Smith.
I'm going in.
Happy New Year to you all. Thank you. Tune in, Facebook, YouTube.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.